Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Arik Greenberg. It is July 21st, 2023, and I'm just going to make a short video here. I guess we're live, and I'll see if I can archive this so people can see this in retrospect. But I just want to say a few words about my new memoir, which has been 14 years in the making. If you know me, if you know who I am, you know me talking about this. And the first book in this trilogy, actually, is this backwards? It looks like it's backwards, Anyway, I don't know how to make it go forward, but you can read it backwards. It's called The Exile, and this is the first book of a trilogy. I have already released this through Enlightened Religion Press, but wait, there's more. We've already launched the second book, which also is, forgive me, it's really not backwards in real life. It's just that's the way this is broadcasting, but it's called I Am the Exile. This is book 2 of the Exile trilogy. So that's book number 2, also available through Enlightened Religion Press, available on Amazon. But wait, there's even more. We have the third book in the series called A Necromantic Incantation. This one also is not actually backwards. It's just the way that we're broadcasting. I'll figure that out in the future. A Necromantic Incantation and an Angry Love Letter to God. This is the third book in the trilogy. This completes the series. So for those of you who are readers, you're readers of big books, yes, this is a big book. This is in excess of 500 pages. And this one is in excess of 600 pages. The first one is an easily digestible 236 pages, I believe 236, something like that. Easily digestible, to kind of whet your appetite, get you launched on the series so that you understand what I'm talking about. Essentially, this memoir, it is largely autobiographical. That's how I would describe it. It talks about my experiences growing up as the child of a compulsive hoarder. My mother was a compulsive hoarder, and my father and I were the enablers. So it talks about what I saw, what I observed, what I experienced growing up, and as my parents got older and I had to get involved in taking care of them as the adult son of a hoarder. My mother also ostensibly experienced some very severe child abuse as a small child, and in my opinion, this it impacted her mental state as she grew older, and she and I both believed that this had a profound impact on her compulsive hoarding, or was a catalyst of her hoarding. So the first book talks about that. It's got lots of I guess you'd say very sensitive material in it. So I'm giving you a trigger warning. It does narrate a lot of my mother's early childhood abuse as she had relayed it to me. She is not around anymore to tell this story, but I am now here to tell her story and have been granted permission from her to do so. So it talks about that, and it tries to tell her story as compassionately as possible, since she was my beloved mother. She was an amazing human being. She was just, very flawed and very troubled, as are we all. But that was her cross to bear. So it tells that story. It ultimately comes to a head in 2009, when I, as the adult son, had the responsibility of trying to clear out my parents' hoard when the family home was placarded by town safety and health authorities. Placarding meaning that it was a sort of a temporary ban on living in the home until they cleaned up the site and made it livable. So it's not actually a condemnation, and there wasn't anything structurally wrong with the home, but it's sort of a temporary condemnation until such conditions have been fulfilled. So I was actively involved in clearing out the hoard, or at least as much of it as we could in a short period of time, to get the town authorities to be able to authorize my parents to re-enter the home. I led a team of family and friends. I spearheaded a team to get this done. And so the book, The Exile, it narrates that period of time. So I'm going to read just a few notes here from, this is an excerpt from The Exile. This is actually from the prologue. So this will give you a little bit of an idea of my writing style and whether this is something that would be of interest to you. First entry, August 20th, 2009. When I arrived at my parents' house, I was greeted with some of the most horrible filth that I had ever seen. Even the driveway was strewn with plastic flower pots, many broken, a shopping cart, baby carriages, an old rocking horse, bottles, cans, leaves, all manner of debris and refuse, all placed very carefully according to the careless plans of an ill mind, seeking to make sense of the pain in her world and in the world we shared. When I approached the front door, I saw the usual debris and junk that was perennially on the front stoop, obscuring the otherwise magnificent deep brown stained hardwood double doors that were once a signal of our welcoming intent. And when I saw the large 11.5 by 14-inch rectangular yellow poster board sign that had been thumbtacked to the right-hand door of the once beautiful entryway, it gave a sense of numbing realism to an otherwise surrealistic situation. I was disappointed, as if there was still a chance that this may have been a dream or a simple misunderstanding. I quickly read the code. Do not remove, deface, or mark this placard under penalty of law. This building is hereby declared unsafe and unfit for human habitation pursuant to the code of the town of Huntington. The occupancy of this dwelling or any part thereof is unlawful. It was now a reality. I could not deny it. The front entry being inaccessible, circumstances required that I enter by a rear sliding glass door around the back of the house, beyond the nearly impenetrable jungle of brush that stood between the front of the house and the rear. I was overwhelmed by a flood of emotions at this point: fear, anger, sadness, even shock, and the denial that this could happen to our kind and compassionate family. We were special, weren't we? Or so we thought. I pulled the heavy metal-framed sliding glass door to the right with great difficulty, as its tracks were loaded with dirt and plant matter from years of neglect. I was exposed to the interior of the house for the first time in 2 years. The feeling that I had in the pit of my stomach, knowing that this was undeniable evidence of my parents' sickness, and also of the moment in which I was required to become an adult, I cannot describe in words. My viscera, the entire front of my body, all ached with a cold groan, a diabolical, icy tingle in my chest and solar plexus. I stepped up upon the ledge and climbed in. When I peered into the living room of my parents' house, all I saw was horrible things, evidence of a beautiful life turned very wrong. I was struck by the utter volume of material in that room. Not only were the two original 1972 chocolate brown and cream striped tweed couches still in place where they had been for nearly 40 years, but also several other large sections of a newer couch that had been bought secondhand about 2 years prior were stood upended in the room, covered with various things never put into place in a usable position. Surrounding them were piles and piles of newspaper, old phonograph records, furniture, potted plants, and every manner of detritus, so that I had to literally climb on top of everything, perched flat on my belly, approximately 4 to 5 feet off the ground, squirming like an eel in order to be able to move to the dining room and then toward the front door. This newer sofa in several sections was brought in to replace the older ones a year or so prior, when my mother noticed that rats had entered into the house through one of the minute holes in the floorboards where heating pipes were directed in from the basement, and then had subsequently begun to make a nest in one or both of the older sofas. Unfortunately, even though our friend Phil had helped bring the sectional sofa in, the older matching sofa and love seat had never been brought out. Evidently, the sentimental connection to them was too strong for my mother to overcome the need to expel rat droppings from the house. I moved toward the dining room, once the heart of the family's home and location of many happy dinners, holidays, adolescent sleepovers with friends. It was now a place that would have horrified even Dickens' Miss Havisham, the vendetta-driven, elderly, jilted bride from Great Expectations, a hoarder in her own right. It was she whose table was adorned by the petrified and spiderweb-encrusted erstwhile wedding cake from decades prior, now attacked by rats. Perhaps those rats were the archetypal forebears of the ones we would eventually find. I had to move very carefully so as not to fall over. There were many pitfalls and places where there were simply not more than a few inches of floor space to safely stand upon and balance before moving to the next location. I moved through the dining room as quickly as I could, rounding the head of the great hardwood table, which was completely covered with junk, sheets to cover the junk, and then even more junk, resting about chest height, preventing it from being usable. All of the chairs were covered with bags of unidentifiable items, almost completely obscured as to their identity as chairs. The kitchen, also completely full of material, both kitchen-like and not, which adjoined the dining room, was now to my left. With great difficulty, I moved past that and into the short entryway leading to the front hall. The front hallway was now also full of junk. As I moved toward the front door in order to unbolt the deadbolt and begin to air out the house from the intolerable stench of decay and mold, I had to step over more and more things to navigate. There was not a single space in the house that was able to be called clean or clear or livable. I can say categorically that the house was worse than ever before. I had seen it briefly 2 years prior, and it was terrible, but you could still get inside. To this day, I cannot believe that my parents lived like this, in the worst of conditions, for over a year. Prior to that, it was barely livable. Now, I would not have considered it livable at all. One could barely move around without jumping or clambering over piles and stacks. The term goat paths has been bandied about in these situations of extreme hoarding. None such existed in the house anymore. The house was filled inside with many years' worth of newspapers, books, old clothing, chairs, assorted furniture, and knickknacks, in addition to what can only be called refuse and garbage. In previous years, I had seen the mess growing, and when I came in 2007 and 2008, during the latter year, I only caught a glimpse through the front door. It was already shocking. But at least there were still pathways during that previous year. Pathways of about a foot wide between tall piles of junk, as tall as the height of a human in places. In other places, there were just piles chest high that were precariously balanced so as not to fall into the pathways unless jostled. But now you had to jump or climb over short piles of newspapers and magazines and refuse in order to get to the next square foot oasis of floor space. There were no longer any clear pathways. They were strewn with shorter piles every foot or so, in order that one would have to step over each pile into a small clearing, steady oneself, and then jump to the next clearing between piles. And with my father's walking problem, I don't know how he did it. That explains his inability to make it to the bathroom at times, which my mother described to me as a function of his laziness or his emotional deterioration. Regardless of the attendant emotional issues, there were serious physical hindrances between him and the bathroom. And this time, the stench was terrible. Previously, the home had begun to present a smell of mustiness and even mold, but this time, there was the smell that I dreaded ever smelling in my parents' house. It was the smell of fecal matter. It was the smell of two people finally being over the edge. Large, fat flies were buzzing around, spawned and gorged on the animal feces that was distributed surreptitiously around the house by both rodents and by the dog that had come to stay, an ill-begotten decision by my mother to help a dying friend. The flies were not only located where the feces was, but also around various piles of squalor and pestilence. The air was oppressive, unrelentingly stuffy, without circulation, dead. I considered the couches in the living room as a symbol of our deterioration as a family. I recalled a photo that my father had taken of the three of us in late 1972 or early 1973, having just moved into the house. He had set up the timer on the Canon camera he had bought just after I was born and snapped a portrait of a happy couple and their 2-year-old child nestled comfortably between them on a winter morning, holding several stuffed animals as family members in their own right. All three were the image of happiness, sanguinary sanity, and suburban success. A public school teacher and a stay-at-mom raising a bright, healthy little boy, curiosity shining within his hazel brown eyes. This picture was now sullied by the reality of deterioration, of decrepitude, and mental illness, compounded over the next 4 decades. That image was now supplanted by the reality of the increasing filth and squalor they had been living in for years. This was the hell that my parents had created for themselves and for everyone who loved them. And at this moment, we could no longer deny our sickness, be it as enablers or the primary party who suffered. We were hoarders. As the only child, I felt it was my responsibility to save them. I had vowed to take care of my parents in their dotage, to be there for them as they aged, as a good son should, but I had failed. All right. So that is the excerpt from, it's actually from the prologue of the book, and it shows up a little bit later in that first book in more expanded format when we actually get to that episode. Yeah, so I'll stop there. I just wanted to give you a little bit of a taste to whet your appetite of my writing style and of the subject matter. And I hope this is something that you would find interesting. And I'm going to do a lot more of these readings, just short readings, maybe 5, 10, 15-minute readings from other chapters in the book, and also in book number 2, I Am the Exile, and book number 3, A Necromantic Incantation and an Angry Love Letter to God. So, all right. So have a great day. And once again, this is on Amazon, released by Enlightened Religion Press. And go and buy the book. Thank you so much.